Hello, Jason. It's Thursday, January 23rd, and I've rearranged my office so I can use natural light now. Side effect of which being I no longer look yellow, but rather blue. I want to start off by confirming the completion of a challenge you sent me yesterday. I've created and posted an Oscar Bingo workbook on the Rad Bromance website that you can go to and download yourself. That way we can allow other people to compete in our Oscar Bingo challenge. Secondly, I want to agree with you on two things, the first of which is that I have a much better understanding of the current film industry and the methods that the Academy uses in choosing winners for the Academy Awards. To counteract this, though, I encourage you to take a few steps to better your understanding of who's going to win these awards. The first and most obvious thing you can do is watch as many of the Oscar-nominated films as you possibly can. I highly encourage you to start with the 9 nominated for Best Picture. As well, while you're watching each film, keep in mind the other categories that it's nominated for, and pay attention to those specific aspects, making note of what stands out. That way you'll have a basis on which to make your decisions for categories that are somewhat less popular than the big ones. The second thing you can do, and this is really going to help you understand how the Academy works as a body, is to look at past winners and the competition that they've faced. In particular, if you look at trends, you'll see that the Academy, generally speaking, doesn't like to give the same awards to the same people year after year. The second thing I want to agree with you with is that you know a lot more about the Super Bowl than I do. For example, one of the questions you came up with is which team is going to make the first interception. I don't even know what an interception is. With that in mind, though, I respond to your challenging me yesterday and challenge you to come up with a list of an odd number of categories that we can have either or answers for. That way we can alternately pick our answers for each category and one of us will come out on top. But then, thinking of sports brought to mind the two other obvious competitions that we could use in our videos. The first being the NHL playoffs, and the second being the 2014 Winter Olympics. And this got me to thinking about why exactly I don't like watching football. So now let me present to you a completely non-comprehensive and extremely biased opinion on why curling is better than football. A recent article in the Wall Street Journal found that out of the 185-minute average length of a football broadcast, there were only 11 minutes of playtime. That means out of the time you invest from your day watching the sport, you're getting approximately 6% action. By contrast, slightly more than 9% of the time was spent on replays. And I don't think it'll come as any surprise that more than 40% of the time was spent on commercials. The remaining balance of time was spent on commentators and literally watching the players stand around on the field. By contrast, in competitive curling, each team is allowed a maximum of 73 minutes in which to make all of its moves, as well as 2 60-second breaks. Adding into that 1 minute of transition time between each of the 10 rounds, you end up with 2 hours and 39 minutes of game time. Out of that time, only 13 minutes is spent not playing the game. Which means out of the time you invest in watching the sport, more than 95% is rewarded with gameplay. I don't know about you, but 95% sounds a lot better to me than 6%. The point of all this, though, is that we should definitely do something with the Olympics, not necessarily a competition or challenge, but definitely at least commentary. I mean, being from Canada, winter sports are pretty much ingrained in our blood. I like winter sports and I don't care who knows, from the icy rinks to the falling snows. Then I started thinking about your point that in Las Vegas you can bet on things so small as the coin toss at the Super Bowl. And more importantly, how a 50-50 chance doesn't pay out 1-to-1. In fact, gambling as a business has a profit motive, so odds have to be rigged in favor of the casino. What makes this so unfortunate is the fact that most games try to hide the fact that the odds are stacked against the player. For example, consider roulette. In its most simple form, you can bet on one of 3 categories that appear to be 50-50 chances, and each category pays out 1-to-1. You can bet on red or black, even or odd, or 1-to-18 and 19-to-36. Common sense will tell you that half the time you land on red and half the time you land on black, so you should eventually come out even. But this isn't necessarily the case because the inclusion of 2 extra spaces means that the casino has better odds than the player. For example, 1 out of 2 spins aren't going to land on red. Rather, it's going to be 9 out of 19 spins, which is slightly less than 50%, and that margin is where the casino makes its profit. Thus, in the long run, the player will always lose. And this, like most things, got me to thinking about social and literary theory. Specifically, it brought to mind an essay by Max Horkheimer and Theodor Adorno about the fantasy of wealth being the impulse towards gambling. Specifically with gambling in mind, consider this quotation from their essay. In this age of statistics, the masses are too sharp to identify themselves with the millionaire on the screen, and too slow-witted to ignore the law of the largest number. Ideology conceals itself in the calculation of probabilities. Not everyone will be lucky one day, but the person who draws the winning ticket, or rather the one who is marked out to do so by a higher power, usually by the pleasure industry itself, which is represented as unceasingly in search of talent. What Horkheimer and Adorno are pointing out here is not only that when we gamble we erroneously believe that we will win, but that we believe that there's a moral imperative behind our winning. We deserve to win. And this translates itself really well to a lot of the moral tales that we're told as children. For my purposes, let's specifically look at Cinderella. Cinderella is unjustly put to work by her stepmother and stepsisters. Because she uncomplainingly and diligently goes to this work, the reader is left with the impression that she deserves some sort of reward, and this reward is brought to her by a fantastical character, her fairy godmother. Not only is she provided a reward in the end, but those who worked against her are punished in most of the versions of her story. The moral that we're left with at the end is that quiet obedience is the path to follow if you want some sort of supernatural reward. This is just as dangerous to us as gambling because in reality these types of things don't work themselves out. In the end, there are no fairy godmothers to judge and reward us accordingly. The odds are never truly in our favor, and there's no supernatural force coming to tip the scales for us. So the moral of this story is, don't gamble unless you're prepared to lose. And so we come at last to chess. As you and I both know, I'm pretty much destined to lose this game, so I'm going to take every little achievement that I can possibly get. So I'll have my pawn at f4 take your pawn at e5. And first blood is mine.